made it, excuse me, what made
Well,
it?
it's because I never really understood, why Jews were circumcised, and so we discussed that.
Why?
And we discussed the covenant
It's a covenant, yeah.
between God and the people.
Well, but
God
why
promised-
circumcision?
Yeah, why did they have to
Because
cut it?
that's what God said.
Well, that was what we were discussing, exactly that point.
Did God?
Some people said it's because there's some kind of branding that goes along with being a Jew. And what did it mean to be a Jew to Abraham? And what did it mean to Isaac and Jacob? And it meant different things to all three of them, because Judaism wasn't very developed.
Well, they
During that time, they were
they weren't
still
Jews.
developing it. And really, it was the rabbinic era, that told us that
Well, but
established
the rabbinic
ritual.
area was
We
all
talked about
interpretation.
sacrifice. We talked about sacrifice. Maybe that foreskin was a sacrifice that an individual makes to God.
Little did we know that eventually it would become almost universal. But there's nowhere in.
Well, it's not that way.
Candy.
I don't know that it's
Is there any place?
Is it any place?
Right, I don't have that.
And it's an,
Come
where
sit
it
with
says
me.
God said, cut it off, that's the thing.
Yes,
Where? Cut,
How are
is that
you?
in Genesis?
yes,
Cut it off?
yes.
Okay.
Is
Is that the deal?
chapter
Yes.
17.
Okay.
It is. In chapter 17, Abraham, God specifically tells Abraham, such shall be the covenant between me and you and your offspring to follow, which you shall keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised.
Okay.
That's it. Hi. I was talking about yesterday.
But somewhere
Oh,
he
yes,
also
how
tells,
exciting it was.
I thought it was that Ammonites, but maybe it was the Edomites.
You're not?
Does anyone honestly everyone is sitting in the back, I just couldn't hear questions. Right. Hi. So that's how I got here early today.
If you come. Ronnie! Oh, I can't tell you. Oh, how come? Oh, I'm so glad to see you for the first time in over a year. Has it been?
No.
Yes, it is. I didn't
But
have.
I went grocery shopping
The 2 years in
yesterday,
a
so
row.
I walked a lot.
Yeah.
I got 6 or 7 pounds stuff for the day. Isn't too bad. Yeah. So that was okay. And I ran around, it turns out I had to be at Rabbi's at 5:30.
Yeah?
I'm sure she is. I mean, they seem to be very foodie.
Oh.
And I remember one of the
And I
times
reached
when I
some
was
names thing. Clustered up by the garage.
Well, of course, if you ever had raised and stuff and he had a company,
yeah, yeah.
Water my plants.
Arnie and I were like, when are we going to do this here?
By the time I made
Put
it.
your hands on it. We said, oh, we're going to do some stuff. So we went.
They did.
It tastes like Reuben. It tastes like all the food it actually tastes like. It was amazing to me. And then it fell because of the final part of the name. That's what happened. Well, if you look at it in comparison, it's money. A small. Well, that's what Preparation was about. Okay. I mean, it was a, he suggested it. I was, it's not really art, it's a community art practice. He made, like, for a bridal party.
Oh, it doesn't have to buy it. I know.
It was crazy. And he did something. Oh, he did all kinds of stuff, but, take pictures. Money.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? It's nice to see you. I'm always amazed that there are actually live people that I can speak with. I will never take it for granted again that there are people whom I can be with face to face and speak with. And thank you for being here. And I know that there are people out there, and thank you to you too for joining us. It's wonderful, and thank you to everyone who's helping make this happen. I don't know if you saw, but James Stringer here in the back, and Jen Mendelson and Carrie and all of the people who are helping us make these moments happen. I'm grateful to all of them for all the help. So I'm really looking forward to continuing this on this week of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is coming up. And just to start with a couple of announcements, we are, for the time being, still planning to have a session next week after Thanksgiving. And I just want you to know that we're planning to have it. If you are available, then please come. Looking forward to your coming in. And if not, please know that this is recorded. It's streamed and recorded, and you're going to be able to see it online. We've also figured out how to make the font here a little bit larger so that it's easier for you here and it's easier for the people at home. And we're also I'm going to make sure to repeat your questions and comments here in the room so that people at home can hear them. And I'm going to keep my distance here and not be masked as I speak to you so that you can also hear me and understand me here in the room as well. And if you would like, there's a mic up here, and you can use this mic to ask your questions, and then everybody will be able to hear them if you like. Okay? So we had an introduction of about 4 sessions into the Song of Songs. And we spoke about the Song of Songs. And we offered ourselves a taste, just the briefest of tastes of the Song of Songs. Just on as we would say in Hebrew, the tip of the fork, just a little bit of the Song of Songs, right? And I just want to share this with you and bring you up to speed and review this very, very quickly because we have a lot to cover today as we move beyond the Song of Songs. But we're going to come back to the Song of Songs by way of reference. The Song of Songs, we're not just going to leave it aside. We're going to come back. So we talked about it being a collection of love poems, snippets, parts of love poems, and about it opening for us a window into Judean life. And especially we talked about this being parts of poems that were read and recited and maybe sung at weddings. And so part of family life, part of life cycle ceremonies, part of what people believed were signs, symbols, and language associated with beauty and associated with other elements of life. In other words, really a window into Judean life. And we also talked about it not just as love poetry and a tribute to the love that is the love of a couple or the love of a family or the pain of love or the search for love. We talked about it also as a collection or a book that pays tribute to love itself. In other words, a book that says, wait a minute, of all the biblical books that we have, this is the one biblical book that says, wait a minute, we want to take love seriously. We want to understand that love is a force in our lives that we would like to pay tribute to. That love, it's not just love poetry in the sense of expressing love on the part of one person to another, or the pain of love, or the joy of love, but rather it is a tribute to love itself within the biblical corpus, which is not something that's obvious, and we pointed it out last time. Remember, we talked about this. Yes, and I want to really highlight this and to speak about this. And we talked about this love poetry and tribute to love in the context of nature. Love as a force in the world. And love as a force in the world that is anchored in nature, but that has a particular expression within humanity. And what this means for us, that in a sense, we are the products in that respect of this natural world. There is a natural order. There is a way in which the world functions. And love is part of that order. And when we celebrate love, we don't just celebrate love, we celebrate love within that intellectual frame. And that's the frame of the natural world, of the pastoral world, of geography, and of time, seasonality. Let us go out into the orchards, the spring has arrived, right? Let us listen whether the songbirds of the spring have arrived, right? The notion of seasonality and time, yes? All of that should sound familiar, by now, yes? We talked about all of this. And then we talked about the language of the Song of Songs referring us to other biblical texts. And the Song of Songs being in conversation with other biblical texts and generating an exchange or a discussion. In other words, it's never isolated. Remember, we spoke about this and we saw this. Even the language of the vineyard and the orchard, all of these words are repeated in other places, and we want to take a look at how they're used throughout the Hebrew Bible, because the Song of Songs colors our reading of the entire Hebrew Bible. The entire Hebrew Bible, and we're going to see that. And we spoke about it. And we talked at the very end, toward the end of the last session, about the Song of Songs setting for us a frame that seeks to make meaning of our lives. In other words, love as a way of making sense and meaning in our lives. And love being elevated to a driver, a value, a principle that governs our lives. Love, and we spoke about other values, we spoke about wisdom, we spoke about faith, right? Which leads me to a moment wherein we need to start out today by reframing for a moment. And I'd like to reframe with you for just 1 second. Remember, we spoke about love, and then we spoke about wisdom. And we spoke about some of the wisdom literature urging us caution with regard to love. And that really what we need is to elevate wisdom beyond love. Right? Remember that we read in the Song of Songs, love is as strong as death. And then we read other pieces, other parts of the Hebrew Bible, including in the wisdom literature, that said, wait a minute, maybe wisdom is not the answer to everything. Maybe the answer to everything is faith. Is trust in God. Right? And I would like us for a moment to reframe that discussion, to return to that discussion, to reframe it. And I want to say something briefly that will allow us now to move forward. And here is what I would like to propose to you, and see whether we can work on that basis and then move forward. And if not, that's okay too. Love and death are natural. They're natural forces. These are forces of nature. They are here. We don't always choose them. We don't always choose when they come up and when they end. They are here. They are forces of nature that govern our lives and that we contend with. Wisdom and faith are in a different category. Wisdom and faith are generated by humanity in one way or another. They're in a different category. So I would like us to think about what we spoke about last time, but to start out by thinking about love and about life and death in one category, and about wisdom and spiritual elevation in another category. And I would like to think about those things that are part of some kind of a natural order, if you like, or a natural cycle that is anchored in nature on the one hand, whereas those elements that enable us to transcend nature, to rise from nature as humanity, on the other, for a moment. And we're going to bring all of this back in the sessions that come forward, in the sessions that come up, right? We're going to talk about this. Because really, what are we trying to figure out? Trying to figure out how we make sense of our lives. What all of this means in our lives, right? Okay? Okay. So this is where we are, and this is how we're going to be moving forward. So I want us to reconsider the formula of love and life and death and reason and faith. And there are other things, and we said we didn't talk about death much last time, but we are going to get to it. We're going to talk about all of it, but I'd like us to reconsider. So far, so good? Yes? Okay, can we continue? So now I would like us to move forward, and I'd like us to move forward to the next scroll. The next scroll being the scroll of Ruth. Does anyone know the scroll of Ruth? Do you remember the scroll of Ruth? Now, the scroll of Ruth is absolutely magnificent, and this is why this is a very short review. It is by far my favorite biblical story, and my favorite biblical book, and one of the more interesting and complicated ones, and also perhaps I think in many ways the most inspirational of biblical books. We're going to talk a great deal about the scroll of Ruth, and we are, remember, here only going to introduce ourselves to the scroll of Ruth. We're not going to read the whole thing. We're not going to cover everything. We're going to do this the way we did the Song of Songs. This is going to be a brief introduction, but I want you to know, for me, a joy to introduce you to the book of Ruth, the scroll of Ruth. And we're going to talk a little bit about the scroll of Ruth and what the scroll of Ruth represents for us, and why the scroll of Ruth is so important, and how it works with the Song of Songs and with other literature that's going to come afterwards that we're going to be understanding later. And we're going to talk a little bit about love through the scroll of Ruth, through the book of Ruth. We're going to talk also about love. And I want us to start thinking about the book of Ruth. Now, you know the story, right? You know the story. So we're going to start at the very beginning of the scroll of Ruth in chapter 1 of the book of Ruth, right? And I want us to understand the drama and the beauty and the depth of the scroll of Ruth. And I want us to understand all of that right from the very beginning. So what page number are we in? 1419. We're on page 1419. So I would like us to start from the very beginning of the scroll of Ruth. And I would like, in fact, if someone could take the microphone and read, and I can rest my voice, that would be great. But just like the first 3-4 verses of the scroll of Ruth would be just wonderful. Would anyone like to do that?
In the days when the chieftains ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to reside in the country of Moab. This man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons were named Mahlon and Chilion. The Ephrathites of
yeah.
Bethlehem in Judah.
Right.
Okay, from.
Good.
They came to the country of Moab and remained there.
They came to the country of Moab and remained there, right? What is the story? Once upon a time, right? Once upon a time, Vayhi bimei shvot hashoftim, right? It happened in the days when the judges judged, the judges governed. It was in the days. Vayehi is not really an and, there's a vav there, but it's not quite an and. It was in the days of the judges, when the judges judged or governed. There was a famine in the land, and this man of Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to reside in the country of Moab, right? Who is the subject of the verse? A man, right? A man from Bethlehem, from Judah, who went with his wife and 2 sons to reside in the country of Moab. And the man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. It's really nice that they mention her name. You know, she had a name too. Her name was Naomi. And the 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. These were the 2 sons' names. And they went and they resided in Moab. Right? Very nice. Anything terribly unusual here?
I thought Moab was an enemy of Judah.
Yeah, Moab was kind of an enemy of Judah, but it was a neighboring country, right? In the sense that Egypt at times was an enemy of Judah, but was a neighboring country, right? And what do you do when you're in Bethlehem, right, which is south of Jerusalem, and Moab is just to the east, and there is hunger, and maybe there's food in Moab? You go there and you try to settle there, and you figure it out. And they went there and they settled there. That's a nice story. That's not a bad, right? I mean, that's okay, right? Okay. Not really. Not really, right? So, does this strikes us like the beginning of a story. And it's not just the beginning of a story, it's the beginning of a journey. And it's not just the beginning of a journey, it's the beginning of a journey, the subject of which is a man and his family, right? Yes? And it's a man and his family at a time of famine. When there's a drought, a famine, there's something going on, there's no food. So they have to go elsewhere, right? Until you read the words. And I want to start with the first 2 words. Vayhi bimei, it was in the days, which of course is what's not translated in our text. Ellen, what did the text read? In the days. Yeah, in the days, right? Our biblical translations gloss over these formulae of words. But I want you to understand what is happening here in our text. The knowing, the sophisticated biblical reader that we are, read these words and think to themselves, what's going on here? And I'm going to share with you why. I'm going to show this to you. And I'd like to share with you why. Genesis 14. 3 times this formula is used in the Hebrew Bible. It was in the days Vayhi bimei. It says Genesis 14. Do you have Genesis 14? What page is Genesis 14? By the way, for those of you who don't know Genesis 14, read Genesis 14. It's the beginning of Abraham's international career. It's the beginning of Abraham being recognized as a leader among the nations. Page 20. Page 20. Thank you. It was in the days when King Amraphel of Shinar, it doesn't, all these kings, Kdarlaomer of Elam, Tidal of Goyim, made war on King Bera of Sodom, Birsha of Amorah, Shinab of Ademah. Anyway, it doesn't matter. All of these kings made war. What is Vayihi Bimei? It was in the days of. What does it was in the days of signify? The beginning of a story of what? Of a war. Of a huge human drama. What happens during that war? If you read chapter 14, in the context of that war, Sodom and Gomorrah are defeated, and Lot, right, who is a relative of Abraham's, right, the family of Abraham, is taken captive by these kings, and them and all of their property, all of their assets are captured and held captive, held prisoners by the warrior kings who won the war against Sodom and Gomorrah. And what does Abram do? He goes on and fights these kings and liberates Lot, liberates the family, and liberates all of their property. Right? And he defeats these kings that had defeated Sodom and Gomorrah. In other words, what are we talking about? A major event in political history, a war, a huge human drama. Is this a story about a family during a famine, leaving, going from one place to another? No, this is war. This is a big deal. This is huge. This is a major event in history, right? Genesis chapter 14. So Vayihi Bimei, when you read Vayihi Bimei on the basis of Genesis 14, you're reading about this enormous event that took place. This big war that took place, right? And the beginning of Abram's career as a leader, as a recognized chieftain and leader among the nations, right? Following which he's blessed by Melchizedek and so on and so forth. Yes? So you see that Vayihi Bimei here is not just the beginning of a story. It's the beginning of a big drama here in Genesis chapter 14. Yes? Am I giving you an idea? Does that make sense? Right? Remember, the formula is only used about a handful of times, just under about a handful of times in the whole of the Hebrew Bible. So we look at it carefully and we try to figure out, what does it tell us? What do the words tell us? Okay, well, that's one piece of information. Here's another piece of information. Isaiah chapter 7. Take a look at Isaiah chapter 7. What page is Isaiah chapter 7?
630.
Page 630. Thank you, Ellen. Page 630. Isaiah chapter 7. Right? Are we there? Yeah, you see it? Isaiah chapter 7. It was in the days of the reign of Ahaz, son of Yotam, son of Uzziah, king of Judah. Right? And again, other kings of Aram and Remaliah of Israel marched upon Jerusalem to attack it. Vayihi Bimei, it happened on these days, in these days of the reigns of Ahaz, right? Son of Yotam, son of Uzziah. This was when it happened. Again, a war, right? When it was reported to the house of David that Aram had allied itself with Ephraim, in other words, the kingdom of Israel, the rulers of the kingdom of Israel, their hearts, the hearts of their people moved, swayed as the tree in the wind. This is the drama we're talking about. Again, war. an entire nation being attacked. Think about this, right? You see what you're understanding what is going on here? Now, let me share with you yet another piece of information. Isaiah chapter 7, and of course, Isaiah chapter 7. One day we will go through Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. One day we will study the prophetic literature because Isaiah chapter 7 is where Isaiah is told to go and tell the king of Judah that the attack will fail. And Isaiah says, "Lo takum velo tihiyeh." It will not arise, it will not happen. There are words, there are phrases here. The poetry of chapter 7, the comfort of chapter 7, the way chapter 7 is framed is remarkable, and one day we will talk about the book of Isaiah. But that's not our purpose now. Our purpose now is to understand that when it says it was in the days that, what we're talking about is it's war. It's big, significant drama. It's big. This is human suffering at a very large scale. That's what we're talking about. Yes? Okay? So that's where we are right now. Now let me offer you another insight. Now here I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this, and if you like, I'm going to ask you to read a little bit more, if that's okay. We don't have to. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. But now we're going to one of my favorite, passages ever, and we're going to Jeremiah chapter 1. Take a look at Jeremiah chapter 1. This is the very beginning of the book of Jeremiah. We're in verse 3. Okay, chapter 1, this is verse 3. What page are we on? 763. Thank you, Margie. We're on page 763. Take a look at this. Yet again, this formula. These are the only times this formula is used in the Hebrew Bible. It was, I'm sorry?
No, I'm saying how it starts in the book is all that different.
Yes, no, this is verse 3. Yeah? And again, this is why we retranslate everything. Thank you, Ellen. Ellen is pointing out that the translation in the book is very different from what is on the screen. I have to find a way to doctor the translations because but let us move forward here, right? It was in the days of King Jehoiakim, son of Yoshia of Judah, until the 11th year of King Zedekiah, Tzidkiah, son of Josiah of Judah, when Jerusalem went into exile in the 5th month. This is the 5th month, of course, from Nisan, from the month of Passover, from the month of the spring, not from Tishrei. This is not when we celebrate our Jewish New Year now, but this is the month of Passover. Nisan, Sivan, Iyar, Tammuz, Av, the month of Av, was the destruction of the temple and the exile, right? So Jeremiah is writing here about his prophecy during this particular period. And he says, and then the word of God came to me, Jeremiah says. And I want you to see this. And God says to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, and the Hebrew word there is yatzar, right? Yod tzadiresh is of the root yatzar. In other words, to form, to create form. Before I shaped you in the womb, I knew you, yedaticha. God says to him, before you left the womb, I consecrated you, kidashticha, right? I consecrated you, God says to Jeremiah. I want to point this out to you. I don't know whether you are seeing what's happening in this country with regard to the debate surrounding choice and life and abortion and so on and so forth. I don't know whether you're seeing what is happening here, but there are parts of Christianity that seize onto this verse and that say God creates life and consecrates life from the moment that life is conceived in the womb. And it's not, and this is one of those verses. I wanted to just point this out to you because in my discussions with religious leaders of other denominations and other groups, this is a verse that comes up. I want you to remember this verse, right? Jeremiah chapter 1, right? I just want you to know it's right there. It's the most magnificent poetry, right? What does God say to Jeremiah? God says to Jeremiah, this has been your destiny. This is not something that you are going to choose or not choose to do. I dedicated you to be a prophet before you were born. In other words, this is part of your DNA. This is part of who you are. This is part of what you are here to do. This is something that you're dedicated to. Don't fight this. Don't fight this. Right? It's the most magnificent poetry, the language, and I netaticha, I made you, I gave you to be a prophet unto the nations, right? In other words, this is Jeremiah's call. Jeremiah says, I was a lad, I was a young man, and God spoke to me, and this is what God says to me, and suddenly in other words, I came to this realization. This had been my destiny all along. Yes? I heard this voice, and this was what the voice said. Right? Now, Vayhi bimei, it happened on the days, and so on and so forth. Was there a war during the days of Jeremiah? Yes, there was. Did Jeremiah know? Because he's writing this at the end of his life. Obviously, he knew that the exile had already taken place, right? All of this is written after the exile. He's now writing as an older person, right? Is he writing about a time of war and defeat and exile and so on and so forth? Yes, right? But what is he writing about? He's writing about his own call to prophecy. In chapter 1. This is the subject. Do you see this? It's magnificent. Magnificent. Right? Very, very special. Okay? Yes, we're here, we're on the page, we're continuing. And I said, and the word actually is aha. The word is a kind of an O in Hebrew. And for the very first time, not the very first time, but one of the few times, the word Adonai, Aleph, Daled, Vav, Non, Yud, right? The word Adonai is used in the Hebrew Bible here, is used in the prophetic literature to say Adonai, right? Normally, where do we use the word Adonai? When we read the word Adonai, where do we read the word Adonai? When we have the 4 letters of the name of God appearing, right? When we have all of that happening, right? That's where we read Adonai. Here it's actually the word Adonai that is used. Aleph, Daled, Vav, Non, Yud, right? Which is remarkable. It's not unique. It's used in other places. It's not the first time, but it's noteworthy, right? So it says sovereign, master, right? For me, master is too masculine. So I use the word sovereign, but it really is about mastery, right? Source of life, I don't know how to speak, for I am a lad. At the time, I thought to myself, how am I going to do this? God said to me, do not say I am a lad, but go wherever I send you and speak wherever I command you. You will go and do what this internal voice tells you to do. You will not question yourself. You will not question your ability. Build yourself up and go and do this. Don't ask yourself, oh, well, how am I going to, who am I to do this? No, no. Go, listen to the voice, and go do what you have to do. Remarkable. And Jeremiah, of all the prophets, Jeremiah is the hero of all the prophets. Jeremiah was imprisoned for his prophecy. He was nearly killed. He was nearly executed for his prophecy. He's the hero of the prophets. Jeremiah is remarkable. Remarkable. And here he's writing as an older man, as an older prophet, looking back at his career. Right? Now, have no fear. I am with you to deliver you. God says to him, have no fear. I will be with you. God put out its hand. It's actually here again. I neutralized the gender. God put out its hand and touched my mouth and said to me, herewith I put my words into your mouth. You will now speak my words. Yes? Are we? Yes? You see what is happening here? And then, I appoint you this day over the nations and the kingdoms to uproot, to shatter, to destroy, and to overthrow, to build and to plant. I have to share this with you. I have to show this to you. This verse is, I think, the single most significant and important verse in this first chapter of the book of Jeremiah. How does change occur? What does change mean? How do we bring about change? Change entails destruction. You're absolutely right, Jimena. You have to change. You have to replace. And replacing means displacing. It means uprooting. It means destroying. It means undermining what we know, undermining what we think, undermining the way we see the world, uprooting the way sometimes we see ourselves, shattering. Bringing about change entails destruction that on the basis of that destruction leads to reconstruction, a reformulation, a regeneration of understanding. But there is no one without the other. One cannot regenerate unless one has undermined a previous understanding or a previous knowledge. And so what we have here, I appoint you as a speaker to the nations and the kingdoms to uproot, to shatter, to destroy, and to overthrow, and then to build and to plant, is in one verse a summary of our mission in the world. This is a summary of the Jewish mission in the world. To look at the world around us and to say, this is not right. Here there's a misunderstanding. Here there's a misconception. Here we're not getting this right. This structure is unjust. This is not right. This is problematic. We need to have the strength, the courage, the ability to look at the world around us and to say, before things get better, this has to be undone. And on the basis of what's being undone, then we can reconstruct, we can plant, we can replenish, we can reconstruct. Because there is no reconstruction if there's nothing to reconstruct. And I had to share this with you. First of all, because it's Jeremiah chapter 1. but secondly, because there is such a deep truth in this one verse. So I wanted to share this with you. But take a look at what happens next. So God says, now we're further down the chapter. This, I believe, is verse 17, right? What page is verse 17? 764. 764. So gird your loins. In other words, I'm sorry? Oh, it depends on the book. I'm sorry. Okay, so maybe 764, 766. Gird your loins. In other words, put a belt on your loins. Put a belt on your waist. In other words, get ready. Get yourself ready. Support your waist. Get yourself ready. Arise and speak to them all that I command you. Do not be undermined before them. Do not be fearful before them, lest I should plant fear. I should undermine you in their presence. I should plant fear in you in their presence. And then what does God say to Jeremiah? I will make you this day a fortified city. An iron pillar, amud barzel, a bronze wall against the whole land. They will attack you, but they shall not overcome you, for I am with you. What happens in this call to prophecy that he recalls now, that Jeremiah recalls at the end of his life, at the end of his prophetic career? What does he recall here? He recalls that in this call for prophecy, he was preparing for war. What is this the language of? It's the language of war. Not only did he preside as a prophet, not only did he function as a prophet at a time of war, not only did he warn people who wouldn't listen to his warnings, not only was he attacked, he was imprisoned, he was charged, he was nearly executed. I mean, all of the things that happened to Jeremiah. He knew in the call to prophecy that he was preparing for war. Genesis chapter 14, Isaiah chapter 7, Jeremiah chapter 1. Right? Every time it says, Vayhi bimei, it was in the days of. Think about the drama that is unfolding. Right? Think about it now. Which leads us to Ruth chapter 1. Oh. And the moment the biblical author says it was in the days, without fail, my heart starts pounding. I start to think, oh no. Right? And what is the story? It's the story of this family that departs Bethlehem or in Judah because of hunger, and it departs and it goes to Moab, and it's the story of a man, Elimelech, and his family, Naomi and the two children, Machlon and Chilion, and they go to Moab and they settle there. And there is already at the very beginning of this book, 14, this is page 14. 1419, thank you. This is page 1419. And there is already at the beginning of this book, and I want to show this to you and to demonstrate this to you, a tension. And it's a tension between the story and what we anticipate by reading the very beginning of the story. Right? And by the way, it's brilliant. Is the story about Elimelech? No. Is the story about this man and his children going down to Moab? No. Is this really about the story of the descent to Moab? No. In other words, it's a phenomenal literary ploy. Look at the way, and we only covered 2 words. Vayhi bimei, it was in the days. Look at the way this scroll starts. The brilliance, the literary genius of the start of the scroll. This is how we read this. And we're already in the midst of some tension. We already know there's something here that we're not getting. There's something here that's going to happen that is unique and unusual. Yes? Is that question or?
Is it the hint that Ruth will be judged in time?
We don't. So the question is this about Ruth being judged in, coming forward in the book? Or we don't know yet. We haven't read the rest of it. But what we know is there is some kind of disjuncture between the story as we read it and the words that appear. And I haven't gone yet into the famine, into Ra'av, the word Ra'av, and when that is used. I only covered a little bit of it, right? But there's already some kind of a dissonance and a tension that takes place in the context of our reading of this text. So we're about to start reading the book of Ruth. And we're introducing ourselves to the book of Ruth. And we're going to talk about what happens later in the chapter. We know the story, right? And what does the story say, right? Now we're a little bit further on. The man, Elimelech, dies, and the 2 sons die, and Ruth has 2 daughters-in-law. One is Orpah, and the other is Ruth, right? Ruth. And Naomi learns that Judah is doing well again, that there's food in Judah, and she's alone, and she's going to go back home. And her daughters-in-law are going to join her, right? And here we rejoin the story here on the slides. Naomi says to her 2 daughters-in-law, and the 2 daughters-in-law are clearly daughters-in-law because it says kaloteha. Kaloteha are her daughters-in-law, right? So we know that these are her daughters-in-law. This is the language of the biblical text. Turn back, each of you, to your mother's house. May God deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May God grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband. And she kissed them farewell. They broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." In other words, the heartache of a departure. The heartache of a goodbye. No, we do not want to depart from you. No, we want to stay with you. Something immediately happens in the biblical text. Immediately. Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters." Wait a minute, a moment ago they were her daughters-in-law. Now, bnotai, my daughters. Turn back, my daughters. And it's not just my daughters once, it's my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons? Turn back, my daughters, right? Oh no, my daughters, right? My daughters, my daughters, my daughters. I'm embarrassed to say this to you, but I feel compelled to say this to you. There's only one place in the Hebrew Bible, one book in the Hebrew Bible, wherein daughters are addressed, they're spoken to in the second person as daughters. It's the book of Ruth. In all other places in the Hebrew Bible where the word daughters arises, they're spoken about. It's in the third person. It's men speaking about their daughters, people speaking about daughters. It's never anyone addressing their daughters. The book of Ruth is the only place in the Hebrew Bible where daughters are addressed as human beings. My daughters, I'm speaking to you. For parents of daughters, and irony of ironies, they're not her daughters. But they've just become her daughters. Isn't this remarkable? Just extraordinary what happened here. Within a few verses. Daughters-in-law have just turned into daughters. Yes.
Well, that's just the difference between talking about them. Daughters-in-law is about them. But she's showing the depth of her feelings as daughters, not daughters-in-law. She says, my daughters.
Yeah, the comment here is that daughters-in-law was the way they were described here appropriately in the Hebrew Bible, and that Naomi turning the language into daughters from daughters-in-law is an expression of her depth of feeling, of Naomi's depth of feeling for these two women who want to stay with her, Ruth and Orpah, and want to go with her and don't want to go back home to their own parents, right? It's describing the depth of feeling, and I agree with you, and I think it's absolutely right, Ellen, except I will say one more thing. It's not just a matter of depth of feeling, their status has changed. Something has happened here. There is a difference between daughters-in-law and daughters. Even if it is emotional, even if it is in Naomi's heart, their status has changed. Yes? Yes.
I was just going to say, it seems like a literary device to make it even harder for them to turn back.
Right. Yes. It's a literary device that, thank you for this, I'm going to repeat this, it's a literary device that demonstrates that it is even more difficult for them now to return and to go back and to leave her, because now they are her daughters. And how would they leave their mother? Right? Yes? You see the genius of this. Yes? And by the way, the only time ever in the Hebrew Bible. Only time in the Hebrew Bible. Remarkable. Remember we spoke about the Song of Songs and the feminine voice and how significant the feminine voice was? Well, take a look at what happens here in the scroll of Ruth, in the story of Ruth. I am afraid I'm going to have to keep you a little bit longer, maybe today, if that's okay with you. But we have a little bit more to cover. And Ruth replies, eventually, right? Orpah decides to leave. Orpah decides to go because Naomi implores her to go. She's brokenhearted, she's crying, but she agrees to go back home. And Ruth says, do not hurt me, do not offend me, do not press upon me. She says, Al tifge'i bi. I don't have it before me, but Al tifge'i bi, to leave you, to turn back and not to follow you wherever, and this is what we're going to look at. We're going straight to the substance of this. Wherever you go, I go. Wherever you lodge, I lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. Thus and more, and the and more here, we're going to talk about another day. So significant. And with parallels in the Psalms. Thus and more may God do to me, if anything until death parts me from you. Right? Yes.
Did she express that because she was acknowledged as a daughter?
Did she express that? Did she make that vow because she was acknowledged as a daughter? Maybe she did. Maybe she did because she was no longer a daughter-in-law, but she was finally called a daughter. Maybe she did. Maybe this was that acceptance of kinship. Maybe she did. Maybe she did. Yes. Now, remember where we started. Vayhi bimei. Right? It was in the days that, and so on and so forth. And remember that Vayhi bimei relates to war, relates to terrible trauma. Right? And remember these words. And we're going to go back to them in a moment. I'm going to go through this briefly. We're going to review some of this in the next session next week. I'm going to move us forward, and I'm going to move us quickly, but I want to close a loop here with you for a second. I wanted to go to this moment of covenant, and I wanted to reach this moment of covenant directly today, because this is the core of the book of Ruth. We're getting right to the core, right to the center of the book of Ruth. We don't understand the book of Ruth. You miss this one verse, we're done. We haven't understood anything. Okay? So now we're going to move forward, and I want you to see 3 pieces of art describing the story of Naomi and Ruth and Orpah. This is Willem Drost. And Willem Drost of the 17th century was a contemporary of Rembrandt's, and is associated with Rembrandt. And this is actually in an English museum. It's neither here nor there, but this is an oil of his. This is from the Ashmolean Museum, and this is an oil painting of his, of Naomi and of Ruth. And I don't know what you see. I don't know if you're able to see this, but look it up if you wish. Look it up, this particular painting. It's a little bit difficult to see here, but it looks like they're arguing. It looks like a really heated debate. You see, I don't know if you're able to see this, but Ruth here is raising her hand, is raising her finger. She's making a point, whereas Naomi is going like this, right? Do you see the hand, right? And there's a closeness, there's a proximity to them, and they're obviously on the road. This is Ruth and Naomi on the road to Bethlehem, right? In Willem Drost, there is something that's going on here. There is a closeness and a discussion, and they're looking directly at each other, right? And here, by the way, Naomi is taller, and Ruth is the daughter, as it were. She, whereas it wouldn't always be represented like this, right? But I want us to see the artistic representations of this for a moment. This is a remarkable one. I want us to compare this for a moment with yet another piece that's an English piece in an English museum, yet again. This is William Blake. You know that William Blake wasn't just a poet, he was also a great artist and a printer, and wasn't recognized in his life for all the art, and actually wasn't actually also recognized through most of his life, almost all of his life, for his poetry either, really until the 19th century. And very, in many ways, romantic, and I'm not going to go into this. This is, take a look at this, and by the way, take a look at the halo. You see the halo above Naomi? You see that there's a halo, right? You see Orpah, right? And by the way, you see the coloration on Orpah leaving. You see the coloration here. She is alive, right? She's leaving, right? You see Naomi, who is in black, in mourning, she is almost the picture of death here. Look at Naomi. She is, right? And look here at Ruth clinging to her. And look at the difference between this representation and the William Drost representation that we saw just before. Look at and the religiosity in this representation. Yes? There's a religious covenant here. There's a religious moment here, and the whole scene is painted as religious. Yes? Whereas there was a closeness, a proximity, a conversation, an intimacy in the Drost painting that is not here at all. Yes? There's no discussion here, right? There's no one, you don't see the exchange here. Yes? The intimacy of the exchange, right? Yes? And I want to show you one more, if I may, right? This is from the Walker Art Gallery from Liverpool. This is Calderon, who was an English artist, but Calderon's father had been a Spanish Catholic priest. He was born in France. This Catholic priest had left the priesthood, and Calderon became a very well-known artist and leader of the arts, and actually a curator in England in the 19th century. And this, take a look at this image of Naomi and Orpah and Ruth. And what do you see here? What do you see here? Love between Naomi and Ruth. In other words, this is almost erotic. Look at this. Look at this. I mean, this is, you know, it looks like they're about to kiss, right? Like lovers, right? And look at this, right? I am showing this to you for us to see the layers of the story in what just happened, in what we just read, as it is represented in art. Yes? And again, this is the tip of the iceberg, what I'm presenting to you here. But take a look at this imagined scene in the eyes of these three artists, of Drost, of Blake, and of Calderon, right? It's a remarkable way of thinking about this particular moment and this moment of covenant between Naomi and Orpah and Ruth. You see what is happening here? Okay, I'm going to skip, and I am going to skip to the first book of Kings. Bear with me here. The first book of Kings, chapter 22, the last chapter of 1 Kings, the death of Achav, king of Israel, right? Occurs there. 1 Kings chapter 22. What page are we on? 561. Thank you. In the third year, King Jehoshaphat of Judah came to visit the king of Israel. Right? The king of Israel said to his courtiers, right? The king of Israel was more important than the king of Judah at the time. Israel was a much bigger kingdom, more significant kingdom than Judah. And here, the king of Judah comes to visit his senior counterpart, the king of Israel. King of Israel says to his courtiers, you know that Ramoth Gilad belongs to us. We have done nothing to recover it from the hands of the king of Aram, the Aramites. Right? We've done absolutely nothing. What are we going to do? He says to Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, who is his junior king, right? Will you come to battle at Ramoth Gilad? Will you fight with me? Will you go to war with me? Remember how we started? Vayhi bimei? Remember, it was in the days that. Remember that there is this interplay between war and the pastoral scene, the family scene, right? Yes? Will you come to battle with me at Ramoth Gilad? Jehoshaphat answers the king of Israel, I will do what you do. My troops shall be your troops. My horses shall be your horses. Do you hear the formula? very unusual formula, occurs in the context of a covenant of something that binds people together, right? And then, of course, Yoshaphat says, please inquire the word of God, ask your prophets whether it's going to be okay. It all ends badly, but that's a different story. But look at what happens here, right? Again, we're back in the dynamic of war and of a nation covenant with another nation, Israel and Judah, right? Making a covenant to fight together. And what is the formula? I will do what you do. My troops shall be your troops. My horses shall be your horses. You see that kind of repetition. Yes? Okay. Not only that, second book of Kings, chapter 3, verses 6, 7. Again, Achav died. Achav was killed in that war. King Achav was king in that war. At the end of Kings 1, the book of Kings 1, and king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. This is the same Moab of Ruth and Orpah, the same king, right? And so King Jehoram promptly set out and mustered all of Israel, sent a message to King Jehoshaphat of Judah, the same king of Judah, saying, the king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you come? Will you join me to make war? And what did he say? I will go. I will go with you. I will go. I will do what you do. My troops shall be your troops. My horses shall be your horses. Right? I don't know what page that is. 568. It's page 568. Second book of Kings, chapter 3, the very beginning of the book of Kings, chapter 3. Again, you see this formula. I will do what you do. I will go where you go. I will join my fate to your fate. Right? Which raises a question for us with regard to this. What kind of a covenant is this? What kind of a covenant is this? What kind of an oath, what kind of a commitment is this? And why is it that the biblical author puts in the words of Ruth, the words of kings going to war, when she's about to join now her mother, effectively her mother, in going back to Judah and looking for a better life and for safety? What is going on here? Why does the book of Ruth send us these signals? What is happening here in this book? What are the biblical authors trying to tell us? There is a tension, and so the comment here, it's a foreshadowing of tensions and of issues that are going to come up. I want you to see that it's not just a simple, yes, there is a foreshadowing. There is a depth here in the language. There is an emotional depth. There is a depth in the love that is being expressed. There is a depth in the commitment. There is a depth in the covenant, and none of the words that are being used here are just simple, intimate words that would be used in the home. These are not formula that we would be using. In other words, the language of the book of Ruth, of the scroll of Ruth, a scroll that we believe, to begin with, was one long poem before it was put into prose. Because these words, I will go where you go. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God. The Hebrew of it is so rhythmic. We believe it was all poetic. We believe the language of this scroll was poetic language until it was put into prose. Right? It's the declaration of an oath, the declaration of an oath, and we are now, having set this up, we're going to go into the book of Ruth. We're going to explore the book of Ruth. We're going to explore that covenant. We're going to explore that commitment. And we're going to talk about love and life and wisdom and faith and of death. This time, not just in the context of the Song of Songs, but in the context of the book of Ruth. And I know I've taken a little bit more of your time today, but thank you for bearing with me. And I want to wish every one of you a happy Thanksgiving. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Rabbi, does that mean that, does that mean that the author of Ruth and the author of King's 2 were perhaps the same author? They could have borrowed the literary. Oh, the format is similar literary.
Question. Can we talk about the change of status?